The hospital room felt eerily quiet, the soft beeps of the monitors punctuating the silence like a ticking clock. I cradled my newborn twins, their tiny faces scrunched in peaceful sleep, oblivious to the turmoil that was about to unfold. A gentle knock at the door startled me, and a nurse entered, a somber expression etched on her face. "Mrs. Archer, this letter arrived for you," she said, her voice laced with poorly concealed pity. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. As soon as the nurse left, I tore it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The words seemed to blur before my eyes, but one phrase stood out in stark relief. "I want a divorce." My world shattered in that moment. Calvin, the man I had loved and trusted, the one I thought would stand by my side through thick and thin, had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. The letter went on to reveal his affair, his decision to abandon me and our children for another woman. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I clutched my babies closer, as if they were the only anchors keeping me from drifting away into a sea of despair. How could he do this to us? After years of struggling with infertility, these precious little ones were supposed to be the culmination of our dreams, the embodiment of our love. But Calvin's absence spoke volumes. He didn't even bother to show up for their birth, too consumed by his selfish desires to witness the miracle we had fought so hard to achieve. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger, and the life I had envisioned for us was nothing but a cruel illusion. In that moment, I made a silent vow to my children. I would be the strength they needed. I would protect them from the pain and betrayal that their father had inflicted upon us. And I would rise above this, not as a victim, but as a survivor, forging a new path for myself and my family. It was a long, sleepless night, punctuated by the soft cries of my babies and the shattering of my own heart. But as the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, I knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would write my own story, free from the shackles of a broken marriage and a broken man. I clutched the divorce papers like a lifeline, my knuckles turning white with the sheer force of my grip. Calvin's words cut deeper than any knife, his cruelty slicing through the very core of my being. "You're delusional if you think you can handle raising those brats on your own," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You'll fail as a mother, just like you failed as a wife." My brother Evan, who had taken me in after I left the hospital, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't listen to him, sis. He's just trying to hurt you." Calvin scoffed, his lips twisted into a sneer. "Hurt her? I'm just telling the truth. She's nothing but a burden, and those kids are better off without her." I flinched, his words like physical blows, but Evan's presence gave me strength. "Get out of my house," he growled, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by a protective fury. Calvin shrugged, his cold eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before turning on his heel and leaving. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of my newborn twins in the nursery. Evan enveloped me in a warm embrace, and I clung to him, my body shaking with the force of my sobs. How could he be so cruel? I choked out, my voice muffled by his shoulder. "He's a coward," Evan said, his voice laced with disgust. "But you're stronger than him, Miranda. You've always been the stronger one." His words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering beneath the pain and betrayal. I pulled back, wiping the tears from my eyes, and nodded. "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "I can't let him break me, not when I have these two precious lives depending on me." Evan smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "That's my sister. Now let's focus on getting you and the twins settled. You're safe here, and we'll figure out the next steps together." As I held my babies close, their soft breaths brushing against my skin, I knew that Evan was right. Calvin might have shattered our family, but he couldn't destroy the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. I would rise above his cruelty, his insults, and his attempts to diminish me. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would write my own story of resilience and triumph. The soft coos of my twins filled the air as I rocked them gently, their tiny fingers curled around mine. It had been a few months since I had taken refuge at Evan's place, and the wounds of Calvin's betrayal were slowly starting to heal. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie, and Evan poked his head in. "Hey, you've got a visitor. It's Derek. My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my old college friend. Derek had been a constant source of support during those tumultuous times, his unwavering friendship a lifeline in the midst of the storm. "Send him in," I called out, unable to suppress the smile that crept across my face. Derek stepped into the nursery, his warm grin instantly brightening the room. "There's my favorite little family," he said, his eyes twinkling with affection. "Derek, it's so good to see you," I said, rising to embrace him with one arm, the other cradling my precious bundle. He returned the hug with gentle care, mindful of the fragile lives nestled against me. "You're looking well," he murmured, pulling back to study my face. "Motherhood suits you." I felt a flush of pride at his words, a stark contrast to the constant barrage of insults and put-downs from Calvin. Derek had a way of making me feel valued, seen, and understood in a way that my ex-husband never could. "Thanks for being here," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you and Evan." Derek waved a dismissive hand. "Don't mention it. That's what friends are for." His expression grew serious, and he lowered his voice. "Have you given any thought to the legal proceedings?" I nodded, my grip on my children tightening instinctively. "I want to fight for full custody. Calvin doesn't deserve to be a part of their lives, not after the way he treated us." Derek's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. "That bastard doesn't deserve anything," he spat, his usual composure slipping for a moment. "But don't worry, Miranda, I'll make sure he pays for what he's done." A surge of gratitude washed over me, and I reached out to squeeze his hand. "Thank you, Derek, for everything." His features softened, and he returned the gentle pressure. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on being the amazing mother I know you are, and leave the rest to me." As Derek left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of renewed strength and determination. With him by my side, I knew that I had a fighting chance at building the life my children deserved, a life free from the toxicity and pain that Calvin had brought into our world. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope blossoming in my heart. Calvin might have shattered my dreams, but with the unwavering support of those who truly cared for me, I knew that I could pick up the pieces and create something even more beautiful, a future where my twins could thrive, loved and protected, untainted by their father's cruelty. The soft glow of the laptop screen cast a warm hue across Derek's face as he leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed in concentration. I watched him intently, my heart thrumming with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. "Are you sure about this, Miranda?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back." I nodded, my resolve unwavering. He brought this on himself. It's time he faced the consequences of his actions. Derek let out a long exhale, running a hand through his hair. "All right, I've gathered enough evidence to bury him, but we need to be smart about how we play this." Leaning forward, he began to outline his plan, his words precise and calculated. "We'll start by issuing a formal demand for a fair settlement, custody, child support, and a substantial alimony. If he refuses, we'll have no choice but to go public with the information we have on his shady business dealings." My stomach twisted at the mention of Calvin's professional misdeeds. The man I had once loved and trusted had been living a double life, engaging in fraud and deceit that threatened to unravel his entire career. "Do you really think he'll cave?" I asked, my voice laced with doubt. Calvin's always been so arrogant, so sure of himself. Derek's eyes hardened, his jaw set in a firm line. "He'll have no choice. Not when the evidence is this damning. We've got him cornered, Miranda. It's time to make him pay for what he's done." A surge of determination coursed through me, fueled by the memory of Calvin's cruelty and the pain he had inflicted upon me and my children. I had spent too long cowering in his shadow, allowing his manipulation and abuse to dictate the course of my life. No more. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I'm ready to take back control." Derek's lips curved into a grim smile, and he nodded. "Then let's make that bastard squirm." Over the next few weeks, we meticulously prepared our case, gathering every shred of evidence and fortifying our legal strategy. Derek was a force to be reckoned with, his razor-sharp intellect and unwavering determination a formidable combination. As the day of the mediation approached, I could feel the tension building, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Calvin had no idea what was coming, and I couldn't help but savor the thought of wiping that smug grin off his face. When the moment finally arrived, I steeled myself, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was no longer fighting alone. Derek was by my side, a steadfast ally in the battle against my former tormentor. As Calvin strutted into the room, his arrogance practically radiating from his pores, I felt a surge of power course through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The game was on, and this time I held all the cards. The tension in the room was palpable as Calvin swaggered in, his cocky demeanor a stark contrast to the grim expressions on our faces. Derek took the lead, his voice calm and measured as he laid out the terms of our proposal. "We're prepared to offer a fair settlement," he said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Full custody of the children for Miranda, along with child support and substantial alimony payments." Calvin's eyes narrowed, his lip curling in disdain. "Are you kidding me? You expect me to agree to those outrageous demands?" I could feel my blood boiling, but before I could speak, Derek raised a hand, silencing me. "It's a generous offer, given the circumstances," he said, his voice taking on a razor-sharp edge. Calvin scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "And what circumstances would those be? You have no leverage here." Derek's expression hardened, and he reached into his briefcase, retrieving a thick file. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." With a flick of his wrist, he scattered the contents of the file across the table, revealing a damning trail of evidence, financial records, email correspondence, and detailed accounts of Calvin's fraudulent activities within his company. The color drained from Calvin's face as he rifled through the documents, his bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Where did you get this?" "That's not important," Derek said, his voice laced with steel. "What matters is that we have more than enough evidence to bury you, professionally and personally." Calvin's eyes darted between us, his mask of arrogance crumbling as the realization of his predicament sank in. "What do you want?" he growled, his hands clenched into tight fists. "Exactly what we asked for," I spoke up, my voice steady and unwavering. "The settlement, no contest on custody, and your silence. Agree to our terms, and this information stays buried." Calvin's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. For a long moment, the room was deathly silent, the weight of our ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. Finally, he let out a sharp exhale, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine, you win." A surge of triumph coursed through me, but I refused to let it show on my face. Calvin had brought this upon himself, and for the first time, he was the one left powerless, stripped of his arrogance and control. As he scrawled his signature on the settlement papers, his hand trembling with barely contained fury, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over, and I had emerged victorious, not just for myself, but for my children. Derek and I exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of our shared triumph passing between us. We had played the game, and we had won, leaving Calvin to face the consequences of his own actions. As we gathered our belongings and prepared to leave, Calvin fixed me with a venomous glare. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. I met his gaze unflinchingly, a newfound strength burning within me. "Yes, it is," I said, my voice unwavering. "You lost the moment you decided to betray us." With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Calvin to stew in the wreckage of his own making. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and I had reclaimed the power he had tried so desperately to strip away. The future was uncertain, but for once, I didn't fear it. With my children by my side and the unwavering support of those who truly cared for me, I knew that I could weather any storm that came my way. Calvin had made the mistake of underestimating me, and now he would pay the price. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent kitchen as Calvin hurled his tumbler against the wall, the amber liquid splattering across the pristine tiles. His face was contorted with rage, his knuckles white from the force of his clenched fists. "That bitch," he snarled, pacing like a caged animal. "How dare she try to ruin me?" His mistress, Samantha, watched him with a mixture of fear and disgust, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Maybe you should have thought about before you decided to screw her over," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. Calvin whirled on her, his eyes wild with fury. "Shut your mouth," he growled, taking a menacing step forward. "This is all her fault. She's the one who pushed me into this." Samantha recoiled, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't you dare try to blame her for your own mistakes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You made your bed, Calvin. Now you have to lie in it." Calvin's laughter was bitter and mirthless. "Oh, I'll make her pay all right. She thinks she's won, but I'm just getting started." As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows, Samantha sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The illusion of their perfect life together was rapidly unraveling, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had made a grave mistake. Meanwhile, I sat across from Derek, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as I recounted the events of the mediation. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can't believe he had the audacity to threaten you," he said, shaking his head in disgust. "The man has no shame." I shrugged, trying to mask the residual fear that still lingered in the depths of my heart. "It's just empty bravado," I said, forcing a smile. "He's all bark and no bite." Derek's expression darkened. "I wouldn't be so sure," he murmured, his voice laced with concern. "Calvin's a desperate man, and desperate men are capable of dangerous things." A chill ran down my spine at his, but I pushed the uneasy feeling aside. "Even if he tries something, we'll be ready," I said, my voice resolute. "We have the upper hand now." Derek nodded, but the worry lines etched across his forehead didn't fade. "Just promise me you'll be careful," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand in his. "I don't want anything to happen to you or those beautiful kids of yours." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "I promise," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We've come too far to let him win now." As the days passed, Calvin's world continued to crumble around him. News of his professional misdeeds began to leak, spreading like wildfire through the business community. Clients and colleagues alike turned their backs on him, horrified by the extent of his deceit. Samantha, unable to bear the weight of the scandal, packed her bags and left, disappearing without a trace. Calvin was left to face the consequences of his actions alone, his once powerful empire reduced to ashes. And through it all, I watched from the sidelines, a sense of vindication washing over me. Calvin had thought he could break me, but in the end, his own arrogance and greed had been his undoing. As I held my children close, their innocent laughter filling the air, I knew that I had won the greatest victory of all, the ability to provide them with a safe, loving home, free from the toxic influence of their father. Calvin's collapse was a harsh lesson in karma, a reminder that no matter how powerful or invincible one might seem, the truth always has a way of catching up. And as I looked towards the future, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that I had emerged from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The sharp ring of my phone cut through the peaceful silence of the evening. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It was Derek. "Hello?" I answered, a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "Miranda, you need to turn on the news. Right now." Derek's voice was laced with urgency, sending a chill down my spine. Without a word, I grabbed the remote and switched on the television, my breath catching in my throat as the headline flashed across the screen, "Local businessmen embroiled in fraud scandal." And there, larger than life, was Calvin's face, his expression a mixture of defiance and barely concealed panic as he was swarmed by a pack of ravenous reporters. "Mr. Archer, is it true that you've been embezzling funds from your company?" One of them shouted, thrusting a microphone in his face. Calvin recoiled, his jaw clenched tight. "No comment," he growled, pushing his way through the throng. But the reporters were relentless, their questions growing more pointed and accusatory with each passing second. "What about the allegations of insider trading? Can you confirm or deny your involvement? How do you respond to the claims that you've been bribing government officials to secure lucrative contracts?" Calvin's face contorted with rage, his mask of composure slipping as the weight of the accusations bore down on him. "Get those cameras out of my face!" he snarled, lashing out at the nearest reporter. The scene descended into chaos, a flurry of shouting and jostling bodies as Calvin fought to escape the relentless onslaught of questions and accusations. I watched in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest as the reality of what was unfolding hit me. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of Calvin's once pristine reputation. As the news coverage shifted to a panel of analysts dissecting the scandal and speculating about the potential legal ramifications, I felt a surge of vindication coursing through my veins. Calvin had brought this upon himself, and now the world was bearing witness to the true depths of his depravity. The phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me out of my trance. It was Derek again. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "I saw it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Derek let out a long exhale. "Yes, it is, and there's no turning back now." A heavy silence hung between us, the weight of the situation settling like a thick fog. "Are you okay?" Derek asked, his voice softening with concern. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm okay," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "This is what we wanted, isn't it? For him to face the consequences of his actions." "Yes, but that doesn't make it any easier," Derek said gently. "You're allowed to feel conflicted, Miranda. This is a lot to process." I swallowed hard, my gaze drifting to the twin cribs in the corner of the room, where my precious babies slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around them. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I have to stay strong. For them. They deserve a life free from the toxic legacy their father has left behind." Derek was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was laced with a quiet pride. "You're an incredible woman, Miranda Archer. Never forget that." As I ended the call and set the phone aside, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and arduous journey that had led me to this moment. Calvin's public disgrace was the final blow, the culmination of his own selfish actions and misdeeds. And yet, as I watched the news footage replaying in an endless loop, I felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the man he had become, and a fierce determination to ensure that my children would never bear the scars of his misguided choices. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Calvin's reign of terror was over, and it was time for me to step into the light, embracing the future with open arms and a heart full of hope. The soft glow of birthday candles flickered across the faces of my loved ones, their smiles warm and radiant as they gathered around the twins' cake. It was hard to believe that an entire year had passed since that fateful day in the hospital, the day my world had been shattered by Calvin's betrayal. But as I looked around the room, surrounded by the people who had stood by me through the darkest of times, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude and hope. Evan, his eyes shining with pride, beamed at me from across the table, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. And beside him sat Derek, his hand resting comfortingly on my arm, a silent reminder that I was no longer alone. The twins giggled and clapped their hands, oblivious to the tumultuous journey that had brought us to this moment. For them, this was simply a day of celebration, a chance to revel in the unconditional love that surrounded them. As the birthday song faded into a chorus of cheers and laughter, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and winding road that had led me here. The pain and heartache of Calvin's betrayal, the fear and uncertainty that had threatened to consume me, all of it had been a crucible, forging me into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. No longer was I the meek, downtrodden woman who had cowered in the shadow of her husband's cruelty. I was a survivor, a warrior, who had stared down the demons of my past and emerged victorious. "Blow out the candles, Mommy," one of the twins exclaimed, their tiny voice cutting through my reverie. I smiled, leaning down to press a kiss to each of their foreheads before taking a deep breath and extinguishing the flickering flames with a single, decisive puff. A chorus of cheers erupted around the table, and I felt a warmth bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with the candles. This was my life now, a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of endless possibilities. As the party wound down and our guests began to trickle out, Derek lingered behind, his gaze soft and affectionate as he watched me tidy up. "You've come so far, Miranda," he said, his voice laced with pride. "I can't even begin to tell you how amazed I am by your strength." I paused, turning to face him with a grateful smile. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. You were the one who helped me find my way back when I thought I was lost forever." Derek shook his head, his eyes shining with a quiet intensity. "You found your own way," he said, taking a step closer. "I was just lucky enough to walk beside you." Our gazes locked, and in that moment the air seemed to crackle with a charged energy, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between us through fire and adversity. Before I could second-guess myself, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in a tentative, exploratory kiss. Derek froze for a heartbeat before melting into the embrace, his arms wrapping around me with a tenderness that threatened to undo me. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, I couldn't help but let out a tremulous laugh. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek cupped my face in his calloused hands, his eyes shining with a fierce determination. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Miranda, and I'll spend every day making sure you get it." As he pulled me into another searing kiss, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future untainted by the ghosts of my past. Calvin's shadow no longer loomed over me, for I had stepped into the light, embracing the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of adversity. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't fear the unknown. With my children by my side and the love of a good man to guide me, I knew that I could conquer any obstacle that dared to cross my path. This was my life, my story, and I was the author of my own destiny.